The Color of Houm, Book 1, Seeing Red by Sean Clark. Chapter 3, Appearances. It had been 3 months since the accident. To Vima Benek, it was just another day. Another day of her family being torn asunder, just as it had happened to the platform, reported dryly on the news the night of the event. The broadcast was even before the call from Akresh Station's security board. Vima's mother was already on the verge of breaking down as she answered the phone and was inconsolable from the time the person at the end of the line had begun to speak. That day was the end of normal. Vima had been waking up and departing her home at the regular times to avoid suspicion from her mother. That day, she thought, was likely to be the last she had to go behind people's backs. Nothing mattered after that day. She stared into the mirror of the upstairs bathroom. She hated her muddy brown skin and equally awful brown eyes. They matched that of her older sister's, the color of which she would never properly be able to see again. Vima's hair was the same color too, but just at the roots. The old bleach job would have undoubtedly made her stand out, Timon had said earlier that week. Standing out wasn't something she would be able to get away with that day. The sleek, straight locks came off one by one with the kitchen shears. Vima bunched up the bits in her free hand as she continued to sloppily cut through the remaining long sections. Unceremoniously, she flushed the whole fistful to make sure that they wouldn't eventually be found. Her hoodie was already hanging off her back and ready to be pulled up to hide the deed as she left the house. In her backpack was a change of clothes to replace her school uniform as soon as possible. Everything else she called her own didn't matter. With one last glance at the childish chambers, as well as the permanently untouched room that used to belong to her sister, she began down the stairs. The melancholic voice called out to her as she reached for the door handle. "Vima, you don't have plans after school, do you, love?" Vima bit her lip hard to keep the tears from welling up in her eyes. Why do you ask?" she replied, one hand to the door and one to the edge of her hood. She kept her eyes away in hopes of not stirring up any more emotions. Her mother, Harda, hung to the corner just between the kitchen and the entryway. "I just wanted to come up with a nice family dinner tonight, eating together," the older woman decided with a sweet tone. "We haven't had the chance to in a while." Vima knew she was lying. The woman had done little more than mope around the house, barely cleaning, barely cooking, and hardly ever putting a thought into her own self. Her father had been more or less absent in their life since about the time of the accident, spending most of his waking hours and more at his work. "I'm sorry," Vima replied, holding back any emotion. "A few friends and I were thinking about eating out tonight, you know, to celebrate the end of exams." "All right, exams," Harda concluded, dragging her tender hands across a section of wall. "You've been doing your best, so you deserve it, huh? If I'm home late, don't wait up. I heard Sean talking about having a sleepover tonight, too, maybe." "Oh, well, don't mind me, then. Just have fun and stay safe." Vima finally twisted the doorknob to let herself out. The tears began to flow, but she held back her voice. They subsided as the fresh air entered her lungs in the following few blocks. The sun was just pushing up over the Kadal horizon, tracing a short path before it hid itself again for another short time behind home. During that time of year, it would come back out past the ugly red planet at noon. Vima was brought back to the ground when she noticed a boy, likely a year or two under her, dressed in a matching school uniform. She didn't know him, despite having seen him several times on her morning walks. The main building of the institution was visible on the hill a couple kilometers away. She wasn't headed there, nor had she been there, for a good part of 2 months. It was upon her 17th birthday then that she had forged and submitted the transfer papers to the Academy's administrators. With so many Nest employees and other off-worlders coming and going about the moon and the red planet, a single transfer among so many others would not have been anything to double-check. Vima and her sister Venna were actually born on Houm, after her mother, a native Vat, and her father, an off-worlder, met and got married. The only memories that Vima held of the planet were from the stories that her older sister had told her, though many were embellished with childhood wonder and the sheltered, innocent point of view. When Vima was 3 and Venna 8, the Nest Corporation had moved their family to Kadal. Vima ducked into the closest alleyway along the path, glancing to either side for any onlookers. She took off the hooded sweatshirt, rolled off the crumpled and unwashed uniform, and changed into light street clothes before tossing the gaudy outfit to the side. It was the last time she would have to keep up appearances. Before exiting, she covered herself up once again in the warm outerwear. Her destination for that day was the Akresh tether and lift to the station. It lit up with artificial lights as the sun hid from view behind Houm. The strobing orbs of one of the lifts heading up the side of the thick cylinder attracted her eye. The station itself glowed with beacons and warning lights to guide the arrival and departure of the ships. Immediately after the accident, the air traffic had been temporarily shut down, but only for a day or two before returning to what could be called normal. Even the news covered it for longer than the extent of the shutdown. Only that sole control platform that her sister was on, as well as a few unmanned beacons and transponders, were destroyed that day, but it seemed many of the corporation were invested in finding the cause and trying to determine if something similar would happen again. The Nest Corporation, who oversaw the platforms and employed the workers upon them, remained mostly silent on the issue. Vima knew her father knew something, as it was his job to do so. However, in the few moments that he had been home those past few months, she had never had the time or courage to ask about it. Her family had received reparations from Nest after the accident, but none of them would ever replace her sister or provide the same sense of warmth that she found lacking from her broken family. It was the others Vima had found that had become her source of her support. Timon was awaiting Vima outside the entrance of the lift. "About time," he spoke, examining her eyes and freshly cut and messy hair. He was of full vat blood, slightly older, but with clear skin and shaved whiskers. He pulled her closer to avoid the crowd as they padded into the device. The moving platforms were massive, able to hold up to several hundred people, or alternatively, crates of cargo to the measure of multiple tons. It wasn't long before the sirens wailed and the warning lights flashed, signaling the closing of the gates and then the eventual ascension of the lift. Vima's ears popped as they reached the upper layers of the atmosphere. She gazed past the people's shoulders and out the thick window panes to the moon below. Kadal was a gentle blue-gray, dotted with dark streets and bland buildings and parks, with a distinct red Houm grass and other foliage growing in wide polygonal patches and messy rows. Timon shifted away from her, and she felt his comforting warmth drift away. She pulled back from the faraway view to look for his presence. He was bent over his large sack on the ground, from which he was pulling out a bundle of red soil-stained cloth. From the bundle, he separated a single covering and passed it to Vima, his eyes looking into hers assuringly. "Put this on before we get up to the top. We can't be standing out." Hey there, greasers and readers alike. This is Sandwich Sean here, the author and narrator of this book. I hope you're liking this audiobook preview so far. I will do one more chapter of this to match up with the preview available on the Amazon page. If you want to get this book for yourself, either in ebook or paperback forms, the link to the Amazon page will be down in the description. Thanks for watching.